today. I'm going to talk a little bit about nitric oxide and how important that is to us, and maybe some of the ingredients, how we look at using nitric oxide to help us to increase blood flow and get better circulation. I'm going to go ahead and put everyone on mute, and we'll get started here in just a second. So basically, what we're looking at with nitric oxide, and before we get into that, let me just throw the disclaimer out there that we're not doing this to offer any treatments or diagnosis. FDA has not evaluated any statements that we're making today, and this is just based upon research that we found and on interpretation and experience of several very well-known practitioners. So what is nitric oxide? Basically, it's a chemical formula. It's just one nitrogen and one oxygen molecule stuck together. But what they are able to accomplish is pretty amazing. In fact, it's very important in our bodies. Basically it's a gas. It's produced by our bodies. Its most important function that it does is vasodilation. It relaxes the inner part of our blood vessels and causes them to vasodilate, and which in turn increases circulation. Well, that circulation is very important for our whole body. So as we look at nitric oxide, this is the fact that this was probably my huge takeaway when I first started looking into nitric oxide. When we're in our early 20s, our body's making perfect nitric oxide. We're at 100%. But as we age, and especially as we start getting into our late 30s, early 40s, our production of nitric oxide drops considerably. Well, without having that good blood flow, what happens is your blood vessels start to harden and they thicken, and then that builds up plaque also in your blood vessels. But you can see in the span of 50 years, by the time you get into your 60s, your nitric oxide production is down to around 15%. So you can see that is a very serious situation. Now, here's another interesting takeaway. It's not just men. Normally we think about, it's the guys that have decreased blood flow, and that's why they want nitric oxide. But actually, the studies in some of the journals are showing that men and women both drop off considerably in their nitric oxide production. You can see here that women, when they start getting into, say, they're about their 50s, that's when they really fall off the fastest. And then by the time you get on up in years, it's the same for men and women, that they both are not producing nitric oxide. Which, when you think about this, we have a very rapidly growing, aging population. And according to some of the journals, that 20% of the Medicare population has at least 5 chronic conditions that are related to nitric oxide production. So you can see that this basically becomes a kind of a scary situation. But literally every system in the body is dependent on nitric oxide. Doesn't matter which system it is, nitric oxide has an effect, because every system relies on a certain amount of circulation. So normally, probably the big ones that we think about are when you look at the circulatory system, the urogenital system. That's what most people are probably going to be using it for. But when you dig a little bit deeper, you look in the literature, you can see that nitric oxide plays into a lot of different conditions. So how does nitric oxide work? Well, several years ago, Dr. Ignaro and a couple other doctors got a Nobel Prize, basically proving that when you relax the endothelial tissue, that you can increase blood flow. So it's kind of like this analogy with the garden hose. If you squeeze a garden hose, what you're doing is you're restricting the flow of water through that garden hose, but you're also building up pressure within that garden hose. Same thing happens in our arteries. But then if you relax your grip on that garden hose, then you'll find that the pressure goes down and the flow goes up. And so that's what our goal is with nitric oxide. So I mentioned Dr. Ignaro. He wrote a book, No More Heart Disease, some years back. And his definition basically here, he says it's a vasodilator, which means that it widens or relaxes the arteries so that more blood flow can flow, therefore lowering the pressure within the arterial system. So you can see on the diagram on the right, you have the inner part, the endothelium. Is when you vasodilate that, what it does is it pushes out toward that smooth muscle, and so then it allows more flow or more space for the blood to flow through the blood vessels. So this is an important chart to keep in mind as we go through our discussion today. This basically is the pathways involved in nitric oxide. Normally we think about L-arginine as being the big player, and I'll show you something interesting here in just a minute. But if you look to the right side of this chart, you'll see the citrulline cycle circling around through there. So you've got the nitric oxide synthase, goes around through citrulline, converts into L-arginine to nitric oxide, and then it continually circulates around and produces nitric oxide as needed. So one of the things that we're going to keep in mind here in just a minute as we look at some of the research is that if you get too much arginine going, it's going to spill over into the arginase pathway, and that could create some potential problems. So keep in mind that the citrulline is the key to this chart here. So let's look at some of the ingredients involved in nitric oxide production. So the first of which is L-citrulline. L-citrulline, the mechanism is that it's basically converted to L-arginine in the kidneys, to NO, and then by that nitric oxide synthase pathway. And so that's part of that uptake that's involved for the L-arginine. It works very efficiently. In fact, here's one study that it says that it works more efficiently converting to nitric oxide than L-arginine does. And it also helps to relax the blood vessels and increase circulation. The other study there, you see that they actually feel that it's more efficient than taking L-arginine itself. Another ingredient that we can look at is grapeseed extract. The mechanism of action on that, basically it's been shown to upregulate that eNOS expression and therefore increase, excuse me, the NO production. So here's a study that basically says it helps boost nitric oxide and has a proven track record for maintaining healthy blood pressure. Another ingredient that we can look at is hawthorn extract. Hawthorn has been around, seems like forever. That hawthorn has been used in cardiac through decades and decades, and essentially it helps out with cardiac function, but it also increases that activity of that NOS. And also helps increase blood flow through the kidneys. So when we look at hawthorn a little bit more, one of the studies says that it basically supports both heart and blood vessel health. Another good ingredient that we can look at is green coffee bean extract. And the mechanism is that the chlorogenic acid in the green coffee beans basically is working as a very strong antioxidant and improving the endothelial function as well. And therefore, it's going to improve the availability of the nitric oxide. Here's one study that says that basically it reduces oxidative stress on the vascular endothelium. So you can see where this is building up. You're tying all of these together to create something that's going to be synergistically working to increase blood flow. Now, the one question that automatically comes up is people say, how much caffeine is going to be in this formula? Well, basically with this dose, you're getting less than 20 milligrams of caffeine, which is very small. Another powerful ingredient is the beetroot powder. So the mechanism of action with the beetroot is basically what you're doing is you're getting an intake of the nitrates. The nitrates will convert over to nitric oxide, and basically that's playing into this function of the whole increasing nitric oxide. You didn't hear it here, but when you think about the fact that it's going to be helping the lungs, and lungs come into play, especially right now, everybody's worried about the lungs during this pandemic. I will not connect the dots for you, but you can connect the dots that you can see where this could be very valuable for us in this day and time. So basically, beetroot powder from this study says that nitrates are converted to nitrite, then nitric oxide by the intestinal flora. So it's a very well-known way to increase the NO. Also put a little vitamin C in. Vitamin C is thought to also help increase that nitric oxide synthase activity, working through the tetrahydrobiopterin pathway. It also is very good for blood pressure and works as an antioxidant as well. Magnesium has also been shown to upregulate that eNOS activity and therefore NO production. Magnesium also works to some extent as a natural calcium blocker as well, or a calcium channel blocker as well. Many doctors use magnesium quite a bit in the cardiac world. In fact, if someone's ever had an MI and they're taken to the hospital, usually one of the main things in the IV is going to be magnesium to help relax the blood vessels, relax the heart. So this study here says that people that take enough magnesium are more likely to have a healthy blood pressure. And then a little bit of zinc thrown in. Zinc has also been linked to healthy blood pressures as well. Now, one little factoid you see there, that zinc absorption declines with age. So that means that when we have this issue with declining amounts of nitric oxide production, and then we're not absorbing zinc, now we see that that's a kind of a double whammy there with the situation. So here's the big $64 question. Why is there no arginine in this formula? Well, a lot of the leading experts have started to avoid L-arginine, and there are very good reasons. Several of the studies are pointing to the fact that citrulline performs better than L-arginine in this type of situation. There is a limit to how much circulating L-arginine we can have, but there is no limit to how much circulating citrulline we can have. And so that basically means that the citrulline will convert to L-arginine and on to nitric oxide as needed, as the body needs it in the correct amount. Many of the studies are indicating the fact that supplementing with citrulline is a more efficient way to keep the stores of L-arginine correct and the nitric oxide levels where they should be. For example, here's one study that basically said citrulline provides a more long-lasting effect, especially for men over the age of 40. So again, we think back about that chart that said that at age 40, our nitric oxide levels are dropping rapidly. And here we're saying that citrulline is actually going to be the answer to help with that. So again, thinking about this chart, this slide, you see that on the right side there, we're circulating the citrulline through there, and it's converting to nitric oxide as needed. Now, here's where the trouble comes in. If you fill that pathway with too much L-arginine, since the amount of L-arginine that we can handle is limited, it will spill over to the left side, to that arginase pathway. And so in that arginase pathway, what it essentially does is it converts to ornithine and then on to urea. But when you fill up that arginase pathway, there are several things that can happen along with that. For example, this study basically was talking about diabetic patients, and without reading the whole thing, you'll see the highlighted area. It says basically increases in arginase activity can decrease arginine levels, reducing its availability to eNOS and decreasing NO production. So really, if you're adding too much arginine in there, you can actually decrease the effectiveness of the arginine that you're taking. It's not going to work correctly. This study here, basically, they said that when they looked at supplementing with citrulline and they looked at supplementing with L-arginine, and basically when they gave the patients straight L-citrulline instead of the arginase activity was decreased by 30%. So that's pretty exciting when you think about it from that standpoint. So there's another reason. Also, in this study, they said that increases in arginase activity have been linked to dysfunction and pathologies in the cardiovascular system, kidneys, the central nervous system, and also dysfunction of the immune system and cancer. So again, showing the importance of not filling up that arginase pathway. And I failed to mention there at the bottom, and also that as the arginase pathway increases, you're also increasing the amount of ornithine, and that can also create problems in our blood vessels as well. And then this study talking about the arginase, it says excessive activity of the arginase or the ornithine pathway in cardiovascular and renal dysfunction and injury has been well documented. So again, we're seeing it probably not making sense to fill that up with L-arginine when there's other ways to get there more efficiently. They've also found that with patients that have had myocardial infarction or they have ischemia, that basically the throwing too much L-arginine in there can cause problems as well. It can actually lead to some remodeling of the heart that we probably don't want to see. This study was talking about whether you want to use L-citrulline or L-arginine. And it's interesting, they found in this study that says only the citrulline supplementation increased nitric oxide in production and improved microcirculatory flow in the mice that they had been injecting with arginase. It said the L-citrulline and not the L-arginine improved the circulation. Again, another study shows here that they tried to compare arginine versus citrulline, see which one would work the best. And they found that only 30% of the supplemental L-arginine entered into the peripheral circulation. And the arginine didn't increase the arginine levels. But when they put citrulline in there, it actually increased that by 35%. So showing that citrulline was much more effective. Also, keep going, and you wouldn't believe how many studies there are, but citrulline supplementation during endotoxemia and not L-arginine reduce the microcirculatory dysfunction. So again, showing the difference between the two. So how are we going to use this? I've gone through several studies, and there's several more that I won't belabor right now, but there's several different uses. So when we're thinking about circulation, one of the prime areas that people look at is looking at sexual performance, increasing blood flow for erectile dysfunction. So like in the NuMedica line, we have this new Nova Complete, which is our nitric oxide formula. You combine that with, say, the functional male or functional female, and then a little bit of support for the adrenals, and it becomes a very powerful kit to help people out when they're thinking about sexual performance. Another area that you could possibly look at is the Magplex Ultra or Methylplex B and the Alpha CU as part of a heart support kit. Now, I will say that there are some conditions where this would probably not be indicated to use the nitric oxide. If people that have like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it actually having too much vasodilation could actually cause more obstruction in the heart. So we'd have to be a little bit careful about those particular patients. And then finally, you could look at it as neuropathy support. So when you increase B12 and alpha lipoic acid, those are powerful ways to treat neuropathy. Along with increased blood flow, you can see that that would be a great combination as well. So appreciate everyone arriving today and enjoying this. Hopefully it was informative. We've got tons more studies. I just didn't want to take the time today to just show you studies. But if you have any questions about nitric oxide, about this particular formula, feel free to reach out to your NuMedica rep, or you can contact me at the email address here, or you can just about always catch me here in the office at NuMedica. Now, for the next couple of weeks, we are offering a special on this, since this is a product launch. We will be offering a coupon code if you put in NOVA, either online or when you call in your order, good through the 8th of March. You'll get 15% off on your order of the Nova Complete. So anyway, appreciate everyone coming on today, and didn't want to take too much of your Friday afternoon. Feel free to reach out, and thank you everyone for coming on today. Have a great day.